Neanderthals, our closest extinct relatives. There's something haunting and magnetic about them. For hundreds of thousands of years, they roamed across the icy plains of Europe and down into the dry deserts of the Middle East. They survived. They thrived. And they left behind traces, tools, bones, hearths, and strange structures we're still trying to understand. Then one day, they were gone. No warning, no explanation. In this journey, we're not imagining, we're investigating. We're digging deep into the science to uncover who the Neanderthals really were. From genetics to archaeology, we'll follow the latest research, tracing the arc of their biology, their way of life, and their encounters with us, Homo sapiens. We'll ask some big questions. Who were the Neanderthals? What kind of world did they live in? What made them different, and what made them just like us? And the hardest question of all, why did they disappear? To understand them, we have to go back to the beginning, back to human evolution. Neanderthals were part of the Homo genus, just like us. The genus Homo emerged in Africa nearly 3 million years ago. Before that, there were earlier ancestors like Australopithecus, upright apes that first walked on 2 legs and shaped the earliest known stone tools. At sites like Olduvai Gorge and Latoli, scientists have found primitive tools, simple but clever. These weren't just rocks, they were selected for the way they fractured. Early humans struck them at just the right angle to create sharp edges, probably for butchering meat, but maybe also for woodworking or defense. Hundreds of thousands of years later, some of these early populations moved out of Africa and into Eurasia. Genetic data shows that their descendants eventually split into 2 groups, Neanderthals and Denisovans, somewhere between 470,000 and 380,000 years ago. That timing lines up with the earliest Neanderthal fossils in Europe, including remains in France and Spain that already showed their distinctive features. And this is where we face a tricky truth. The term species is just a scientific label. In real life, nature doesn't always follow strict rules. So here's a question. Were Neanderthals human? Technically, human isn't even a scientific word. It's cultural. Anatomically, Neanderthals were different from Homo sapiens, but not by much. Take throwing, for example. For years, scientists thought Neanderthals weren't built to throw overhand like us. But newer research, especially a 2014 study, suggests otherwise. Neanderthal shoulders were strong and mobile enough for both thrusting and throwing spears effectively. As for brains, theirs were slightly smaller in proportion to body size compared to ours, but not alarmingly so. In fact, plenty of modern humans today fall within the Neanderthal range. And brain size isn't everything. Organization and structure matter more. Endocasts of Neanderthal skulls reveal brains that were different, yes, but not necessarily less capable. Now let's talk hair. Genetics tell us the genes that made modern humans mostly hairless showed up around 7 million years ago, long before Neanderthals split from our lineage. So Neanderthals had some body hair, but not fur. Their skin was exposed, like ours. Tool-wise, Neanderthals used mostly flake tools, short, wide stone pieces shaped by hand. They didn't have handles, just simple blades you could hold and use directly. One flake might be a knife at first, then reshaped later into a scraper or something else. These could be fitted onto wooden shafts to make spears, robust, heavy, and great for close-range thrusting. But don't be fooled. They did throw spears too, especially at short distances. And when those hit, they hit hard. Homo sapiens, by contrast, pushed their tools further. They created handles. Their knives and notched blades worked better for shaving wood, carving, sawing. Some tools even resembled spades or butcher knives. And now and then we find tools with shapes unlike anything in modern indigenous cultures, meaning Neanderthals may have had very specific tools for very specific tasks, now lost to history. At a site called Abri Romani, Archaeologists discovered just how central wood was to Neanderthal life, not just for tools, but for fire. In cold climates, fire wasn't a luxury, it was survival. It gave heat that clothes couldn't provide. Along the rock wall at this site, researchers found 8 hearths, perfectly spaced. Maybe each one belonged to a person. That S, not unlike the fires used by Aboriginal groups in Australia to sleep near and stay warm at night. Neanderthals didn't just sit around a fire, they likely knew how to make one. At Abri Romani, scientists found traces of manganese dioxide, an unusual substance. Now, manganese dioxide can be used as a pigment, but here's what's interesting. When it's powdered and sprinkled over wood, it actually lowers the wood's ignition temperature. In other words, it helps fires start faster and easier. Was it fire-starting powder? Was it body paint? Maybe both? Either way, it shows that Neanderthals selected their materials carefully. They understood what worked and why. There's more. Their teeth, yes, teeth, tell a fascinating story. Neanderthal teeth show heavy wear, especially in individuals from colder climates. That's because they weren't just eating with their teeth. They were working with them, clamping hides, gripping tools, pulling and softening materials with their mouths. And hide working? That's no small job. You have to remove every scrap of meat and fat, soak it, clean it, stretch it, and only then can you turn it into buckskin or leather. Different hides had different uses. Deer for soft garments, bear or woolly rhino for heavy insulating outerwear. Some of those giant hides, like mammoth or rhino, might have been too thick for clothes, but blankets, ground covers, wall insulation, definitely possible. Now picture this, a projectile point, made of stone, found embedded in an animal bone, not just stuck, deeply lodged with enough force to paralyze the creature. The only way that happens is if the weapon was thrown, not thrusted. That kind of high-energy impact with a parabolic arc suggests a skillful, calculated strike. So yes, Neanderthals were throwing spears, and they were doing it well. What did they hunt? Deer, ibex, moose, bison, and even carnivores, cave bears, brown bears. Some of these were hunted while hibernating, an opportunistic but dangerous tactic. Imagine sneaking into a cave where a bear is asleep and trying to kill it quietly. It's high risk, high reward. There's also evidence they sometimes hunted cave lions, hyenas, and wolves. These were megafauna, any animal over 45 kilograms or about 100 pounds. You had to be smart, strategic, and probably work as a team to pull that off, and they didn't just hunt land animals. In caves near the Black Sea, researchers found signs of salmon consumption. Now, fish remains don't preserve well, especially at coastal sites, many of which are underwater today due to rising sea levels. But despite the lack of widespread evidence, we do know Neanderthals sometimes exploited aquatic environments, and here's a twist you might not expect: insects. In some parts of the world today, eating insects is totally normal. For Neanderthals, especially when calories were tight, bugs may have been just another food source. Living like this wasn't easy. Hunting, gathering, carrying gear, hauling meat, caring for children or injured group members, it was exhausting. And biologically, Neanderthals had large bodies, strong muscles, and big brains. That means they burned a lot of energy, even at rest. Some estimates suggest they may have needed 3,500 to 7,000 calories per day, depending on their activity level and the climate. That's like eating over 6 pounds of meat a day just to keep going. Boiling food was also part of the picture. No metal pots, of course, but that didn't stop them. Heated rocks placed in containers made of bark, leather, or even skulls could bring water to a boil. At Abri Romani, a carved-out stone basin was found near multiple hearths. It might have been used to boil stews or steam meat. Elsewhere, plant remains show signs of having been cooked. These weren't just meat eaters, they had variety. And what about protecting their kills? In a world full of predators, defending food was essential. Neanderthals likely used intimidation tactics, shouting, waving arms, hurling stones. Some researchers even suggest they may have deliberately lured predators like hyenas or wolves to their kill sites, then ambushed them. It would explain the frequent appearance of predator remains near their camps. But whatever the tactic, one thing's clear: they were brave. Taking on carnivores requires confidence and coordination. When it came to shelter, not everything was grand or permanent. Sure, there were cave sites, but most Neanderthal dwellings probably left little behind. A lean-to made of branches or a hide-covered frame doesn't fossilize. In some cases, portable shelters like tents or teepee-like structures might have been used. These wouldn't last thousands of years, but that doesn't mean they didn't exist. They also traveled. The movement of stone materials shows this clearly. Neanderthals left behind poor-quality rocks at tool-making sites, but carried high-quality flint over long distances, sometimes over 60 kilometers, that's nearly 40 miles. And the sharpest material of all, obsidian, was carried up to 300 kilometers, or almost 200 miles, before being used and discarded. That suggests more than casual wandering. It implies territory, strategy, and possibly even long-distance trade. And speaking of trade, what about children? There's some speculation that Neanderthal kids were given tools to play with from a young age. As they grew, boys and girls likely took on different tasks. How do we know? Wear patterns on teeth. In some adult women, the lower teeth show signs of use as a third hand, maybe for carrying materials. Men, on the other hand, show more wear on the upper front teeth, perhaps from different tasks entirely. This suggests a kind of division of labor, though not necessarily rigid gender roles. Here's a surprising detail. Most Neanderthals were right-handed, just like most humans today. That kind of handedness implies asymmetry in the brain, which is linked to language. So, did they speak? So, did Neanderthals have language? The genetic answer gives us a clue. Of the 48 genes associated with speech and language in humans, 11 were found to differ in Neanderthals. That doesn't necessarily mean they couldn't speak, but it does mean their version of language might have been different from ours. They also had a version of the FOXP2 gene, a gene strongly tied to speech in Homo sapiens. Not identical, but close enough to suggest some kind of verbal communication was likely. Then there's the evidence from their skeletons. One skull, damaged by what seems to be a blunt object, shows signs of healing. Researchers believe it was the result of interpersonal violence. Someone struck this individual, maybe during a dispute, but instead of abandoning him, the group cared for him. He recovered. That kind of social support, even in the face of violence, points to something deeper: community, forgiveness, perhaps even empathy. Did they have symbolic culture? Jewelry is one possible sign. In Spain, archaeologists found a necklace made of eagle talons dated to around 39,000 years ago. Maybe it was made by Neanderthals, or maybe by modern humans. It's hard to say. But this isn't the only case. Talons, feathers, and other symbolic objects are often found in Neanderthal sites, especially eagle parts, like wings. Curiously, the wings often had little or no meat on them, so they weren't being eaten. They were chosen, maybe for status, maybe for beauty. Later, in Siberia, artifacts like ostrich shell beads, a polished stone bracelet, and even a bone needle were uncovered. These are all markers of symbolic behavior: jewelry, sewing, aesthetic design. But here's the twist. These items likely came from modern humans. Maybe Neanderthals made them. Maybe they learned from us. Or maybe we brought them. We don't know. One of the most puzzling discoveries comes from Bruniquel Cave in France. Deep underground, far beyond the reach of daylight, archaeologists found a circle of broken stalagmites. Burn marks covered them. It was a structure, not natural. And it was built nearly 175,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens arrived in that region. Why would Neanderthals crawl deep underground, choke on smoke, and spend hours arranging stone? Was it a ritual? A sacred site? It seems too deep to be a living space. The answer might be spiritual, or maybe something we can't yet grasp. Then there's Shanidar Cave in Iraq. In the 1950s, scientists uncovered the remains of 10 Neanderthals. One of them, known as Shanidar 4, was found with clumps of pollen around the body. It suggested he had been buried with flowers. Some of those flowers may have had medicinal properties. Was he a healer, a shaman, or just deeply respected? Regardless, the ritual hinted at something sacred in death, a connection beyond the physical. Interestingly, this isn't unique to ancient Europe. In Papua New Guinea and parts of Brazil, there are modern traditions where the dead are not buried, but consumed. It's believed the soul is honored by being part of the living. In some tribes, people even ask to be eaten after death. These are spiritual beliefs, rooted in love and community, not savagery. Could Neanderthals have held similar views? We can't say for sure, but the possibility lingers. What about medicine? Psychoactive mushrooms have been suggested as a theory for shaping the human mind. But in truth, there's little evidence Neanderthals used psychedelics. Most healthcare was likely physical, tending wounds, keeping warm, feeding the injured. Still, those actions alone suggest tenderness and care. A society that nurses its wounded is not primitive. It's human. Stories may have mattered too. In Aboriginal communities, tales of rising seas have been passed down for hundreds of generations. Some even recall the names of islands now lost beneath the ocean. Could Neanderthals have done the same? They lived through ice ages, shifting climates, massive herds on the move. It's possible that stories, passed from mouth to mouth, were part of how they adapted and survived. Eventually, the world changed. Around 45,000 years ago, a new culture emerged across Europe, the Aurignacian. It brought art, cave paintings, bone flutes, and along with it came Homo sapiens. But the arrival of sapiens wasn't an instant replacement. In fact, some stone tools, especially from the Châtel-Perronian industry, appear to blend Neanderthal and sapiens techniques. Did they trade ideas? Copy each other? Interbreed? Yes, and that's one of the most overlooked facts. Neanderthals never really disappeared. They were absorbed. Their genes entered our lineage. Their cultures merged, and over time their distinct identity faded into ours. Some groups may have died off, others were outcompeted, but in the end, they became part of us. This wasn't a war of extermination. It was slow, regional, uneven, and likely, in many places, peaceful. Homo sapiens may have had larger group sizes, more social complexity, and better innovation. More people means more ideas. More innovation means better tools, better survival. Neanderthals, with smaller populations, may simply have struggled to keep pace. Still, they left a mark. In some modern humans, up to 2% of our DNA comes from Neanderthals. Altogether, about 20% of the Neanderthal genome still exists across humanity. Traits like immune responses, skin tone, even the way we handle pain, these might trace back to them. Their legacy is in our bones, and so this Odyssey ends not with extinction, but with inheritance. The story of the Neanderthals is not a tragic fall, it's a quiet merging. A slow passing of the torch. They walked the earth before us, beside us, and within us, and in that way, they never truly left.